Hello, good evening, and welcome to the TNT Show number 193. That's right. Very soon we'll have transmitted and aired 200 shows. This is all down to you, the audience, because we do it for you. There isn't much self-gratification in what we do. We do it for you. We do it for you, and we're grateful to you for joining us every Wednesday at 7 o'clock. All we'd ask is that you tell friends, colleagues, family, and others to come and see what they've been missing, and they're very welcome. Well, as I always do every week, I'm going to talk about the fact that this has been another great day for British democracy. And I will give you the latest breaking news, which is there is now a new way to conjugate the verb to labour. So tonight we're going to conjugate the verb to labour. The past tense of to labour is also known as I lied. In the present tense is I am lying, and the future tense is I will lie. So if anyone asks you to conjugate the verb to labour, now you know it, and you'll find that on my Blue Sky account as well, if you're that interested. The other great news tonight is that the privatised water companies have been such an enormous success that they're now having to be, if you'll excuse the pun, bailed out. Get it? Either by shareholders or, I suspect, at the last item will be that they will appeal to the government, i.e., your taxes will bail out people who gave the bulk of their income to the shareholders. There's nothing wrong with them doing that. It's just that you would expect the government to take a more interested view in people and organisations who fail so conspicuously, and you would think it might put them off privatisation forever. I think if you think that, I think you're very much mistaken. Because, listen to this, while the water companies are losing money hand over fist, Labour, apparently because the country is very short of money, Labour is pressing ahead. Listen to this. I mean, this is truly astonishing, but it's true. They're pressing ahead with £3 billion worth of cuts to what? Where do you think they're looking for £3 billion worth of cuts right now? Well, I'll give you a clue. The person who was talking about it most recently was a gentleman called Stephen Timms. And Stephen Timms is the Disability Minister. So guess where this is going now? Stephen Timms is looking for £3 billion worth of cuts to disability benefits. Now, I have to say, there may be one or two people out there, for all I know, and I'm sure as Reform will tell us, the Reform Party will no doubt tell us in glorious technicolor, there might be a few people out there, maybe more than a few, who are getting disability benefits to which they're not entitled. But I have to say, if I was looking for major savings, and according to Stephen Timms, that's what his purpose is in all of this, I wouldn't be looking at disability, people on disability. I would be looking, frankly, at the people where most of the deficit lies. And it doesn't lie with disability benefits. It lies with people who evade tax, right? Tax evasion, not tax avoidance, which everybody's entitled to do to avoid the tax, but evading tax, i.e. tax to which people properly ought to be paying and they're not paying. Now that's immeasurably almost greater than the $3 billion that Stephen Timms is chasing. It makes you wonder about priorities, it really does. Because in other news we learn that Lady Moan is still at large on her yacht or yachts. So what is it about priorities? You know, it makes more sense to go after somebody who's disabled than to chase after Lady Moan. Come on, give me a break here. If somebody landed here from Mars, they would say, these guys are completely nuts. They've got all this money over here, which they need to collect, and they've got this little bit over here, but they're going to spend all their time on this little bit over here. I mean, in what universe does that make sense? The Labour universe. And remember, all these characters were elected on one word. You remember their slogan? Change. Change. The £3 billion worth of cuts, listen to this, was first proposed by the Tories and was declared unlawful by the High Court. So the Labour Party has gone back to this mess and is trying to resurrect it. I mean, honestly, if I told you that, that's a joke, you would say, come on, it's too far-fetched. It's real. It's out there. They're doing it. It's crazy. Anyway, enough of all that. So on to something much more interesting. Tonight, we're delighted to welcome David Murray to the show. And you'll really enjoy listening and watching David, because he is a real, true activist. He's somebody who's out there and says, I want to change things. David, welcome to the show. How are you?
Good evening, John. Yeah, I'm very well.
I describe you as an activist. Tell us how you would describe yourself.
No, I think that's pretty accurate. I'm not, what would you say? I'm interested, since the referendum, I just couldn't understand the economics of the whole thing. It just didn't make sense. So it got me reading and got me listening to lectures and things on economics for a while, just to try and get my head around what was happening, the idea of a Scottish nation being too wee to be a nation, and it would have real difficulties in funding itself, and all these sort of issues that come up day after day. And it was quite enlightening, the whole process. And I've found that there are other ways, there are alternatives, despite what Maggie Thatcher used to tell us and what every politician's told us ever since. There are alternatives to look at what we can do to the finances of a country and help the people rather than the businesses, or prioritize the people rather than prioritizing business, so that everybody's helped.
Interesting. I want to talk about a whole range of things tonight. Obviously, the referendum, economics. I most assuredly want to talk to you about how you feel about the BBC and some general things. But I'd like to begin with a question we've got from Charles. And he says, how does David think the recent fracturing of long-standing international alliances might affect the current independence strategy? Now, Charles is assuming there is an independence strategy, which you may quarrel with.
Yeah.
But what is your thinking on that, David?
Well, I'm not very well versed in international affairs, I have to say, but I would think that there's going to be a bit of pressure on the government not to make change at the moment. It would be an excuse, wouldn't it? They'd say this is not the time, but they would say that anyway. The whole point is that the international agreements are fracturing at the moment, and I think that should make us look more at our own resilience as a country, so that we don't need to rely on so much on the supply chains that the UK does rely on at the moment. Tim Lang just did a recent report for the government on food security in the UK, and he found that it's dismal. We're relying far too much on imports, and we've got no real resilience in our supply in the country now, because we've just overdone it. And he's got a report to sort of make sure we build that back up. So these sort of things are going to come to the fore now, that there's the international pressures are going to put pressure on these just-in-time supply chains and our food security and energy security.
I think, David, you make an excellent point. On previous shows, we've talked about the impact on the supply chain of disruptions like tariffs. The very thing that, in fact, Trump is pressing ahead with, because apart from anything else, tariffs tend to be retaliatory. In other words, if you slap a tariff on me, my motivation is then to slap a tariff on you.
Exactly.
It's like kids on the street. We've moved away from international diplomacy into a bit of sort of downright thuggery almost.
Yeah, I think it's even more ridiculous than that, because the fact that you're putting a tariff on doesn't hurt the other party anyway. It's your own population that ends up paying for it.
Yeah.
So the idea is that the goods will become so expensive that, say, the US will then, there'll be investors encouraged to meet that demand in the US. But why? If it's like saying China's charging them too much for electric cars. You know, they'd be better just accepting the cheap labour and getting the people in the US that they would have making the cars doing something else, you know, doing something more productive for the US. It could be anything. There's so much needs done.
In many ways, Trump has gotten perhaps confused by a very strange way he looks at capitalism. Because the way capitalism ought to work, its most effective, is to buy the cheapest you can and sell it for the highest you can, so you maximize your profits.
Yeah.
If you add to the cost of what you buy,
yeah,
effectively you're corrupting that whole mentality. You're producing. It's not capitalism anymore. It's something else.
Yeah.
It's almost like a form of national socialism.
No, you wouldn't send them out shopping for you, that's for sure.
I mean, it's just crazy. So you're absolutely right. You know, I'm a motor assembly plant in Chicago or Detroit, perhaps more likely, and all of a sudden, all my Chinese components cost more. So, and the president tells me, but there's a solution here. Why don't you go out and create your own parts plant? You can have it right next door, and then you can make your own parts, and you don't have to buy them from China. Well, that's where we started off. We started off with every plant had its satellite factories round about, and then along came the management consultants and said, "Hey, this is stupid. The Chinese can make it much cheaper than you guys are making it. These little guys are making it. Why don't you buy from them? And here's a great idea. You've got all these warehouses full of components ready to be fitted. What you do is you go to the Chinese and you get it cheaper. And furthermore, you tell them, I only want the product on the precise moment, the hour that I actually need it. So you can get rid of all the warehouses too." What a great idea. Now all of a sudden we've got a president who says, you need warehouses.
Absolutely.
Then the management consultants will come back in and say, yeah, but since he changed the rules, now you do need the warehouses back. Well, what are you going to do? Build a warehouse overnight?
No.
Create all these plants to supply that? Doesn't make any sense. I mean,
there's plenty of work there building the warehouses, I suppose.
Well, I suppose there would be some work for somebody, you know, overnight. Maybe you can buy them in prefabricated from China.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just crazy and it's just nuts. But the larger point that is being made by Charles is the impact it might have on what's happening in Scotland. And that really depends, I suppose, to some degree on how much the US government thinks about Scotland. And I suspect not a lot. I mean, it's not something they would rather humiliate Keir Starmer than spend any time trying to humiliate John Swinney, I imagine.
Yeah, I think it's more important to look after, and the Scottish government's first primary concern is looking after the Scots and making sure we are provisioned with everything we need, and that is their duty. And anything out with that is a nice to have, but that's their first duty, and that's what they should concentrate on and make sure we've got all we need here.
Yeah, one thing that's always intrigued me, we talked about the stuff you buy in the shops and stuff, and it's maybe a lot of the stuff that you buy in the shops in the UK is, I mean, it's product shipped from New Zealand.
Yeah, sure.
You know, I mean, fruit and wine. I mean, I don't know the economics of wine making in New Zealand, but I'm astonished when I go around supermarkets, not just in the UK, where there's a tax, etc. But if you go around supermarkets in continental Europe, you can buy New Zealand wine for less than the guy next door can make it.
Yeah.
I mean, what are the economics of that? It must be hugely subsidized. Gracious.
Must be, yeah.
So you were concerned about the 2014 referendum, and that was really what stimulated your thinking about the future. So how do you regard the future now?
Well, I look at the way the UK is going, and I see that our living standards they're dropping. You know, excuse me. You know, things like the NHS waiting times going up. That's a reduction in our living standards. You know, They're losing their libraries. That's a reduction in their living standards. All these things, parks getting overgrown, and it's all deteriorating, and that affects people's mental health, and our whole lifestyle changes as and we're brought down by that.
Yeah.
And I just don't see any change coming, because there's no change in thinking, as you said, with Labour coming in on that promise of change. Nothing's happened. In fact, things have probably got worse. So there's no prospect of improvement within the UK. So I think we have to concentrate on putting pressure on the government, the Scottish government, to really ramp up the idea of independence for that reason. And it's the thing that gets me is that whether we're a union supporter or a supporter of independence, we all want the same thing. We want our children to grow up in a healthy, good environment and with prospects for the future, and and just something to bring their life with hope, and come into the future, look to the future with hope. And if we could only talk to, get that narrative out there that independence is the way to that, and there's the alternative economies are there to give a people's economy rather than a business-centric GDP-centered economy that would give us that better standard of living and improving exponentially into the future, with our own ingenuity and cognitive ability, We've got such a well-educated population. We're proud of that. But at the moment, all our kids, if they want to match a job with the attainment they've achieved, they have to go away from Scotland, or else they stay here in jobs that they're not meeting their potential in, and they're unfulfilled. And it's sad. And there's independence is the way out of it. I don't see any way out of it in the UK at the moment.
I think a lot of people would increasingly agree with that, but again, they're uncertain. And also, reform is the interesting situation that's arisen. If you look at the opinion polls, and I have no reason to doubt that they're accurate, but having said that, there's many a slip. It's cup and lip. In other words, you can be ahead in the polls today, but you could actually lose the next election because of circumstances, as they say. But it presupposes that you're not just in office, but you're in power. In other words, you actually change things, and that I think that's the difference there. But reform in England, and I think in Scotland, will simply stand on a platform of saying the whole place needs reformed. You've had Labour, you've had Tory, you've had Labour back then, you've had Tory, you've had Labour again, and nothing has changed.
Yeah.
So when they say to you that we're trying to make things better, you don't believe them. You shouldn't believe them. However, we in reform are going to reform things. And that's seductive for a lot of people who don't study politics, and they know that Labour and Tory have failed them. It's a siren song. It's like a replication of Trump. This is it. The place has failed us.
Yeah. No, you can see it being attractive, especially to youngsters today. When they don't have the experience of too many. At our age, we can remember a different economy when things were better, but youngsters just don't see any improvement, and they can't buy houses, and they can't rent houses and stay with their parents till they're in their 30s. It's just not. It doesn't work for them. So you can see why they would look at reform, and hopefully in Scotland they look on SNP as the disruptors, and maybe that's why there's such a strong independence following in the young vote.
Now, before we came on air, you and I were talking about what the Scottish government should do to advance independence, and I think we agreed roughly. You didn't say this; these are my words. So come right back at me if you feel I've misrepresented you in any way. That it's a bit like has been said by others, that there's a cage, and the Scottish government is in that cage, and they're going to make sure that cage is as tidy and as well functioning as possible, but they're not terribly interested in moving outside the cage. Would you tend to agree with that?
I think that's a good analogy for it. Yeah, I think they're doing a very good job of devolution. They've done the best job out of Northern Ireland, Wales, and the devolved settlements to actually. They said they would improve the child poverty stats, and they've done that, and that's been recognised by Danny Dorling, the professor down south, and other people. So you have to applaud them for that, because it's not easy. They've got a balanced budget. They have to find savings elsewhere to get that money to the right place. But these are the most vulnerable people in our society, and it's right that they should get the targeted spending. But the thing that doesn't make sense is England, because they're not devolved. They're funded from the currency issue of the government. And that, if Rachel Reeves, that she relies on this narrative of our fiscal rules to constrain her, but that's a self-imposed constraint by the government.
Yes.
They don't have to have these fiscal rules. They've got the Treasury keyboard, and as you were talking about earlier on with the disability benefits getting cut, that there's no need for that. If she just burned her fiscal rule book, she could get the Treasury keyboard out, and that $3 billion would be safe, and she could create what she needed to make society function better and raise living standards. But she hasn't done that. So it's a political choice for England's NHS to be in the state it's in.
Yeah, given that, just very quickly, there's a question from Julie Brown, accepting what we said about the Scottish Government being in a self-imposed, not quite a self-imposed, but in a comfortable cage. She's asking, how do we put pressure on the SNP to go for independence as quickly as possible if the government that's in power is comfortable with where it is? Why? How do you manage that? How do you put pressure on?
Well, this is the big question, isn't it? Because the leadership just don't seem to listen to the membership, especially in things like currency. The members, there seems to be quite a wide awareness in the membership that how important an actual currency, a Scottish currency from day one is. But the leadership just seems to have deaf ears to that, and they sort of they talk around the issue, and we've got 6 tests to get through before we can get to currency, so we're going to start with sterling. But the issue of getting towards independence should be through the membership, but that's not how it's working. So I'm open to suggestions as to how to put pressure on them, to be honest.
Well, maybe Julie will come back and tell us how she proposes to do it. But yeah, it's an interesting situation. It's not unusual, by the way, because a glance at any history book will tell you that secessionist or independence movements tend to go through a fairly predictable path. I mean, the governing entity, you can call it an empire, you can call it the subsidiary operation, a colony, whatever terminology you like. But the reality is that they offer a SOP. They say, don't break away because we can meet your aspirations. Not all of them, obviously, because you want to separate, but we don't agree with that. But we'll give you this chunk. And the chunk is carefully crafted. In the case of the Scotland Act, as I understand it, broadcasting was intended to be devolved. At the last minute, Jack Straw intervened and said, if you press ahead with this, I'm not going to support it. So they dropped broadcasting. And now we can see the consequences. We have a BBC which is pretty much completely out of control of Scottish interests, and has its own agenda, and feels entirely invulnerable to Scottish opinion. It just disseminates what it likes. The Scottish people have no real control over its output. And if you compare its behaviour in Scotland with its behaviour elsewhere, if the BBC the government in Westminster has a problem with the BBC, they're quite happy to pick up the phone. and say, I prefer you didn't do that. I find it hard to conceive of John Swinney picking up the phone and saying to somebody in BBC Scotland, you just traduced my government, or you traduced some individuals, and I want an apology. I mean, can you imagine that happening?
Well, I think even if it did, nothing would happen. But the idea of impartiality as far as Scotland is concerned with the BBC seems to be out the window. That it just seems to be quite often a propaganda machine for for the union, or for the at the moment the Labour Party, the Scottish Labour side of the Labour Party seem to be getting a lot of they seem to get a lot of support from. But I mean, maybe they'd argue that they're being journalistic and that the government of the day should be held to account. I don't know, but the whole independence movement with 50% of the vote just doesn't get represented in the BBC at all, as far as I can see. And I think it's a sign that journalism like your own, these shows and things like I'm a writer for Bylines Scotland, who are very open to, they want open debate, so they want articles and content from everybody. And I'd say to your readers, anybody watching this video, that they'll welcome anyone's writing in an article around about 1,000 words on anything that you're interested in.
That's good. We had Martin Roche on last week, and he was making that point too. And I think Bylines Scotland is a place that people should go if they're looking for impartial material. And you write for them, and others do too. They're open to all sorts of shades of opinion, and to me that's very healthy. I would love to have more unionists on the show. We have great difficulty because I keep asking them straight questions, and not everyone likes that. So we don't get too many unionists, but they're very welcome. They're very, very welcome. As, by the way, are any Scottish Government ministers are very welcome to come on the show as well. And I find it, between you and I, a little strange that, I actually approached the Constitution Minister directly, and he said, it's not something I want to do. In other words, I don't want to talk to independent supporters. That I didn't really understand. No. But that seems to be his priority. Now, I'm quite sure who he talks to, but he's giving up a wonderful opportunity here to reach out. And next week, we've got Kenny McCaskill on the show. So, and he's been talking about Grangemouth. So I say to all SNP ministers and MSPs, come on the show, tell us what you think. If you think that what David and I have been discussing about the SNP government, the Scottish government, is very happy to be in its little cage and doesn't want to rock the bars, shake the bars down, tell us we're wrong and show us that we're wrong. I mean, it's this is, so far it's still a free country. So come on and talk to us. I'm happy to do that and give you the space to do it. But let's see. I think the last pseudo unionist we had was Kenny Farquharson, and that was an interesting discussion. And I liked Kenny a lot on a personal level. I seem to think, if I remember right, some of the things he gets a little bit confused about the Constitution, and there's no shame in that. Very few people in the UK understand the Constitution at all, so it's no great surprise that anybody should have troubles understanding an unwritten document.
No, that's right. I mean, to be fair to the SNP, I'm not sure they even realise they're in a cage. It's just the fact that Holyrood's just an arm of the UK government. Even though it's the Scottish Parliament, it's in the system. It's the party system itself's all linked to, it's all centralised so that everything can be targeted at one small group of people from the UK government in Westminster, and that controls the whole, the whole party, the whole SNP party. So,
I think too. I mean, I'd like to get your views on this, by the way. Because we've been interviewing people recently from the islands, and they're having difficulty with second homeowners, etc., etc. And I know the government is trying to do something about that. But their complaint was that Scotland is too centralised. What's your take?
Well, yeah, no, I agree. Actually, I think we need to get the power base out to the local areas. I think local councils could do with far more power to implement change in their local area and have, be guaranteed investment from the central government.
Well, why do you think the Scottish government has never done that? Because you would think it'd be an obvious thing to do. All of a sudden you've got a little bit of power here in Scotland that you didn't have before, and part of that power is you could devolve power.
Yeah.
Why do you think it hasn't happened?
Well, I wonder if it's to do with the balanced budget side of things again, that, they've only got so far that they can spread the sort of cash they're given, the pocket money they're given, and each council does get their allocated amount, but it's not enough. They can't stretch it to all the services they need to because of our austerity, the UK austerity policies. So that, even though the Scottish government may want to show largesse to the local councils and keep their libraries open and keep all the services going, they don't get the money from the UK government to do that. So it's.
So do you think that the centralisation has been maintained because of economies of scale, i.e. that if we were to devolve, say, Perth and Kinross into Perth and Kinross, as it used to be, that somehow we would lose because we wouldn't have the economies of scale?
I don't think so. I think it's maybe more power. It's I'm going by the SNP leadership's relationship to the membership. I think it's a concentration of power at Holyrood that it's actually how they want to work things. I think they want to control everything at Holyrood.
Aren't they just simply replicating the problem that they have with Westminster? Because Westminster will always want to centralise. Westminster is based upon an empire model, and you can't run an empire by decentralising. You need to retain firm control. You just have to do that. It's part of being an imperial power.
Yeah, and I think it's part of this system that we were talking about 5 minutes ago. It's the fact that they're in this cage, that they're in the UK system. They're probably advised by the UK civil servants and things that this is the way things are done, and there is no alternative.
Well, it just strikes me as bizarre. Here you got a wonderful opportunity to say, look, these councils were set up under a unionist government. We're not unionists, so therefore we're going to take the opportunity to devolve power to further across communities, right across the country. But in fact, it hasn't happened. It was like, oh, we've got a little bit, and we need to hang on to that little bit we've got. All that happens when you do that, frankly, is you encourage the people in Westminster to say, well, I'll tell you what, we think you got too much.
Yes.
And therefore you end up with the Internal Market Bill.
Yeah.
And the Internal Market Act.
Yeah.
And now I hear tonight that the SNP is objecting to it. Well, the time to have objected to it was in Brexit, and to say we don't accept the Brexit ruling.
Yeah, of course it is, yes. Yeah.
But when it comes to these big picture items, there seems to be a tendency to say, oh, well, it's completely against what was agreed, but, what can you do? And the answer is you can do a lot. I think you could do a lot about the BBC. I don't think you have to sit there and take it. The argument is that broadcasting has devolved. Well, set up a different system. Set up an online system, which isn't broadcasting.
Yeah.
Why don't you give David Murray a whole bunch of money? He's been writing on Bylines Scotland. It's been well received. Give him some money.
Yeah. Well, I think we do need to get to local journalism again as well. That devolving everything, to the local level builds power from the bottom, and we can make change happen from the bottom easier than we can through a leadership that won't hear anything.
Well, yeah, it just seems to me to be a wasted opportunity. Why not go for it? And I'm deeply troubled by the broadcasting thing, I have to say. This notion that you've got this cuckoo in the nest because somebody else put the cuckoo in the nest, you can't do anything about it. You have to live with it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a counsel of despair. Instead of having hope and saying to young people, I'll tell you what, we're going to give you a bunch of money to set up your own internet systems. I mean, first of all, let me just say, and people have made this comment, a number of people tonight, about the 25 million that the Scottish Government is going to assign to the Grangemouth situation. I applaud that. I mean, I think that's fantastic.
Yeah.
But I have to say to myself, if you were to head for independence, there'd be a lot more than 25 million. And furthermore, that decision wouldn't have been taken in the way it was. But again, it's being locked into the system and then trying to ameliorate the effects of the system. I mean, it's like the bedroom tax writ large.
Yeah.
Instead of saying you can go and get raffled in a nice, polite, legalised way, or object to it. Now, and the interesting thing is that when people did object to the bedroom tax, it was abolished.
No, that's right. Yeah.
It helps to underscore that civil disobedience has a place.
Yeah, yeah. No, it does have there seems to be a lot of I've noticed that there seems to be a lot of big protests in London these days that just get ignored in the same way that the indie marches here get ignored now on television too, on the news, even though they can't, even when at times when they were really massive, that they got virtually no coverage.
Yeah.
And that's how you silence it, And what we've got with the BBC is we get the UK story every day. They get to write the story that gets told to the nation because it's a state broadcaster.
Yeah.
And so we have to give an alternative view. If we want people to see the alternative view, we have to manage to get it out there.
Why do you think the Scottish Government hasn't said, look, here's a pot of money which enables there to be a Scottish voice reporting to a Scottish administration that effectively disburses news with an independent panel, disburses news throughout Scotland, except it's on the internet and it's not through an old-fashioned series of antenna. Why have they done that, you think?
That doesn't make sense to me, but it seems a no-brainer because then you get your story out every day.
Yeah.
And it's all about stories, it's the stories we tell.
Precisely.
That will drive us forward. The story we've got on money in the UK is completely back to front, but it locks us into a certain economic track that we don't see any way out of because that's the only story. And when everybody's thinking the same way, I think it's an old saying, if everybody's thinking the same way, nobody's thinking at all, because there's no heterodox side to it. There's nothing outside the orthodox to take you and adapt to the environment. You just stagnate.
And you end up with this very centralized, conservative, the small and the large C approach to everything.
Yeah.
In other words, if you don't hear it from somebody at the centre, then it's not worthy, because there's no value in people outside the centre. They don't have any value whatsoever. The only value they have is to be taxed so that I at the centre can have a more enjoyable lifestyle with my mates who are all here at the centre, upon which we largely agree upon everything. I mean, we talked, I think, before the broadcast about Rory Stewart's book, which I've mentioned in previous shows, and I think you've read it too.
Yeah.
And it's full, absolutely cram full of material you could use to create an SNP broadcast.
Yeah, he's critical, isn't he? Yeah.
I mean, when you read it, you think this must have been written by some sort of raving Scot Nat.
But this is the whole thing about
nationalist who deplores the arrangements there. Oh, by the way, if Rory wants to come on the show and correct me in any of this, he's more than welcome. But my reading of his book is this: that he deplores Whitehall and Westminster. He thinks it's an absolute shambles. And if you read the stuff, I mean, if the SNP was to run its next broadcast simply on quotes from his book.
No, that's true. But I mean, what he says is as well, it's just, as we all know, it's a bubble. The Westminster, they're living in an artificial world down there. And it's back to what you were saying about devolution of power again, because what the centralised government in Scotland does is they don't see the periphery as well as they should. And this is where we need to be. The devolution of power means that we can devolve the strategic jobs. You know, if you go back to the very beginning to where you've got building resilience into each council area.
Yeah.
If you were to make sure each council area could, if it needed to, produce enough food, it had some sort of energy network that could back up the national grid if the grid went down, and you had all these different sides of that. They'd have to be produced locally, so there'd be jobs created locally.
Exactly.
For all these different utilities that we needed, and the knowledge would be local. So that is how you build independence. You are independent because you've got everything you need in your local area.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that you need to be isolated from everybody. But what it means is you don't need to rely on anyone else.
Precisely. I mean, anyone who's ever watched the Sky television that broadcast to Ireland will see what an enormous difference. I mean, somebody with an Irish accent will come on and sell burgers.
Right. I haven't seen it.
It's not unusual. If you want to shift product, you speak in the language and accent of the people you're trying to shift it to.
Yeah.
Provided you're not grossly over-centralized, where somebody who makes those decisions about the way you broadcast, the way you market, is based on a different place. But you see what happens is that all that happens is that the suppliers, the manufacturers say to Sky, we need you to run these ads with Irish people. And furthermore, all the Irish utilities are there. The insurance companies sell to Irish people, speaking as Irish people, men and women. And it's a revelation, because you see the equivalent in Scotland, and it's all by people who were hired in London to project. And you think that it could be so different. I mean,
it could. I agree with you. Yeah.
And it's a travesty. It's just incredibly crazy, the situation we have. Let's move on a little bit. I want to just ask you again, because it exercises lots of people. Trump is now in charge. You and I have both listened and watched and read some of his pronouncements, particularly on Ukraine. If you were to look down the pike, as the Americans say, down the road, 12 months from now, how do you envisage the world looking then?
Well, that's a difficult one. But the thing is that anything Trump says can be changed tomorrow. He has something completely contradictory could be out of his mouth tomorrow. So it's hard. It is very difficult to say where we'll be. I think.
Have a guess, David.
I would think that they're definitely trying to sort of cancel the Russian. They're trying to make it sort of whitewash the Russian invasion of Ukraine at the moment, by the sounds of things, and whether there's going to be some arrangement where the Donbass and the other areas are maybe not. I don't see the Ukrainians agreeing to them being Russian in any way. Whether they'll get the choice is another matter, but there might be some agreement that comes that there's some sort of buffer zone or something like that. They become a different sort of territory between Russia and Ukraine, that both have some sort of access to the resources. I'm just completely guessing, but whether they come up with some compromise like that, or whether they just completely shaft Ukraine and the US pressures them to gift Russia the areas that Russia have already got. But I'm no expert in these matters.
I'm not sure that Putin would settle for what he's got.
I know. No, that's true.
He's invested too much in this, and I mean,
Well,
I
you
have
couldn't
to
trust
say,
them anyway.
yeah, I mean, I would like to think that there would be an amicable solution, but it's hard to see how that can be arrived at if you don't even have the person from the country that's the subject of the discussions present in the room. I mean, it's
No.
the most extraordinary thing. As somebody said to me the other day, there, I was watching a program from the south, and they said, "Imagine, if you like, that France has invaded and occupied Kent and Surrey. Would you all be content to say, well, I think now that they're there, they should just stay there?" The
Absolutely.
answer
They're just saying, get
was
to.
no, we think it's an outrage. Well, that's the way the Ukrainians feel. But I
Yeah.
suspect that Putin's agenda is very different. I suspect his agenda is, I do not like the idea of NATO bases ringing Russia. And if I can somehow persuade NATO to withdraw, I would feel much happier. And besides, Putin is cut from the same cloth as Trump, which is why I think they both understand each other. I wouldn't go so far as some people have to say that Trump is Putin's bitch. I think that's overstating it. But I can see why people are tempted to reach that view. Nonetheless, I do feel that Putin has an agenda all of his own. And he must be greatly relieved, because up until about a week ago, he was regarded by many people as a war criminal.
Yes.
And now he's off the hook completely. And he's now a friend of the West, apparently.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it's
It's a
crazy.
crazy situation.
But you know something, there's a lot to be said for the view that it's when you have a crazy situation that you can bring about major change.
This is true. This is true. I mean, the other thing is that whatever is agreed, this is because of Trump and the agreement between Trump and Putin and the negotiating they've done. What's to say it gets changed the minute Trump's out the door, and another president comes into the US? There's no integrity with these guys at all. But the looks of things, they'll just change what they say in a moment.
I would say in their defense that I suppose the term is realpolitik. When you get there, you can't afford to behave like Trump. When you're negotiating with somebody, the very last thing you do is to say to them, by the way, I'm going to give you this and this. Do you have anything for me? That doesn't work in business, and it certainly doesn't work in international relations, which is all about give and take. And if you start off by saying, this is what I'm going to give you.
Yeah. I mean, I think
everyone knows the best way to start a negotiation is to say to the other person, so what is it you're looking for?
Yeah.
And now they have told you what they're willing to buy, what they're willing to pay for what you have to sell. And then you can negotiate down from there.
Yeah. I've noticed with Trump that a lot of the problems Trump seems to be trying to address at the moment are he's looking at things from a businessman's point of view instead of what a government actually does, because government treating the government like a business is completely false. So he's trying to make these cuts and and all these departments where he thinks, in welfare and all these, just pretty much like Reeves at the moment. But they've got the Treasury keyboard. They can do these things. Whatever's needing done, they can do. They don't need to be making these cuts. It's not like they need to cut out the fat of the welfare system. It's not a profit they're trying to make. What the government are there to do is to provision the people that need welfare.
Now, you tell me this. Answer this conundrum for me, David.
Right.
How is it possible to grow your economy through austerity?
That's impossible, I would say. Yeah. A lot of people get hurt if you try to grow your economy through austerity.
Yeah. Isn't the answer in the actual words?
Yes.
Austerity means you're not going to grow.
And it is a political choice. Austerity is never necessary. The government can afford to employ any unused resources that's available for sale in its currency. So anything that's in the UK that's unemployed at the moment, the government could be buying up to do things for the country and raise our living standards.
Yeah.
But they're convinced they need to have these rule books, the fiscal rules, and it's complete nonsense.
Yeah. I mean,
And it's hurting people, it's killing people, you know?
and again, if you read Roddy Stewart's book, you will see at a glance his lack of confidence in the Treasury. Because we're back to this little centralized group of people who all went to the same schools, the same universities. They believe in the same orthodoxies. They don't want to rock the boat, but they're willing to shake it just a little bit on the margins. But they don't want to reform. Now you can see, frankly, where the Reform Party is going to pick up lots of votes, because they're saying exactly the things that people are actually thinking, which is we need to reform this stuff. It's crap.
Yeah, but they're picking up on the wrong things. I mean, you know, the immigrant side of things, immigration I could talk about for an hour on its own. It's they've just got everything back to front. I mean, we need immigration to keep the NHS and things like that going. But by taking these immigrants and getting people to immigrate, we're robbing that country of their best thinkers and best skilled and thinkers, you know, and that's the thing that happens because that country's lost the people that are going to advance that economy. They end up as more of a basket case economy themselves, and that causes the mass emigration from their country to places like the UK. You know, so we need to recognise the big picture and how interconnected everything is.
Yeah.
That we can't rob North African countries of their doctors and not expect there to be repercussions for that, you know, for our benefit. That, you know, there's consequences to these things.
Again, I think it goes back to empire again.
Yes.
Perhaps. You know, because in the past, if you had a problem, all you did was to say, well, I need to tax the Indians more, or I need to beat up on the Americans. You know, like, for example, they had a problem with tea. The East India Company were in trouble in 1770 with tea. And somebody in Whitehall at the Treasury dreamed up this marvellous scheme that what they should do is tax the Americans. And all of a sudden, they ended up with a whole bunch of Americans throwing tea into Boston Harbor dressed as Indians. And everyone thought that was a hoot. The British response was to say, no, you guys need to pay the tax. We're all paying the tax here, and you need to pay the tax too. And because you don't seem to understand that, we're going to send some troops over. And of course, they send the troops over. What happens is the kids start throwing snowballs at them. What do the troops do? They shoot them.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, you've got a revolution on your hands. Not because they were terribly interested in separatism. It was 30-30-30, the usual proportions. It's because the 30% in the middle decided to join the separatists. And that's how we ended up with the colonies becoming United States. But I mean, it's all down to the miscalculations on the part of the centralizing authority.
Absolutely.
Which produces a disproportionate response because they didn't understand what they were dealing with.
No,
and I think that's the issue.
Yeah. And the unintended consequences of everything they do. Yeah,
precisely. And it's because you've got a group of people who are making the decisions, and they don't have access to more accurate data because they don't want the accurate data.
No,
because they've come to
they've got all the PhDs they want to actually get the data for them, but they don't look. They don't want to look. Yeah.
Well, it's because it's so unwelcome. You know, it's like you and I turning up at a Westminster meeting with the government and saying, "You realize if you do this, that will happen." And they say, "Well, I don't want to hear that." It's taken me days, months, years to come to this decision. And what you're doing, David and John, is to try and alter that. I don't want that. I just don't want the thing altered at all.
No.
And we say it's a mistake. Of course it's a mistake.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so much of that goes on. And I think it's almost inevitable when you have this little coterie of people who all love each other. And you need that refreshing input from somebody like you walking in and saying, you know something, I think you've got this wrong. And let me explain the reason why.
Yeah.
Like you did with the currency just now.
Yeah, I mean, there's loads to say on that. But, you know, there's a group at the economy and the government are working for someone. This isn't a mistake. The economy is supposed to work this way for a certain group of people, and that is a very small group of people at the top of the chain, and it works well for them, but it doesn't work well for anybody else. But because they give us the wrong story deliberately, we believe there's no alternative. We believe in that, and that's been 45 years since Maggie said that first. And we just don't see. We can't see outside our cage. That's the cage that we're in. We're talking about the SNP being in a cage earlier on, but we're in a cage, and we need to break out of it. And we need to get, the Scottish Currency Group. They're building a website just now that everybody should be looking at that just to see. That's the route out of the cage. The other groups like Scotonomics will be on after this show, and they're going to watch them. They're talking about Europe tonight. That and the consequences of that. This is how you gain the knowledge to get out of the cage we're in, and that's how to find the alternative routes to independence and well-being.
You're right, David. The bottom line is we ought to be encouraging people to support shows like Scotonomics, the Currency Group and its website. We should be, everybody watching and listening tonight should be supporting Indie Live, because Indie Live is, it's your antidote to the BBC.
Absolutely.
Please see it in these terms, right? You're not doing anyone a favour except yourself by supporting Independence Live, because Kevin and his team work their socks off to give you new and exciting shows all the time. And there's a very good chance that David will be on Indie Live as well. So you're supporting him, you're supporting me inadvertently, and you're also supporting all the other folks who are on Indie Live. It's just, if you look at the budget for Indie Live and compare it to the 300 million pounds that BBC squanders every year, ostensibly in Scotland, but we all know that's not quite accurate. They're as Boris Johnson says, they're spaffing money away. You'd be far better off putting your hard-earned pennies into Independence Live. Yeah. That's my plug. But I'll come back to you next week and repeat it. Look, we've only got a couple of minutes left. Is there anything you want to add, David, to what you've already said?
No, I think it's just a case of people should try and get out. The best antidote to the hard times we're in is an informed electorate. So we all need to do as much reading and writing as well as we can to spread the word and get more knowledge of where the misconceptions are in our, in the whole politic that we're in. Our money system, the way it's talked about, is back to front, and that we need to learn more about that. And Scottish Currency Group, Modern Money Scotland, find them both on Facebook. They've got tons of information in these sort of things, and that'll change your look. That'll change your outlook on the whole economy and the whole country, really. And that's what happened to me, and it's led me to where I am now and writing for Bylines Scotland and being here. So I'm delighted to get the opportunity to talk, and I'm passing the baton on to you lot now to spread the word, and let's get to independence as soon as possible.
Excellent. I couldn't have summed it up better myself, David. Thank you very much for being on the show tonight. We seek to educate and inform and entertain you. You've done all of that for us tonight. Appreciate it. And
Thanks
the best
for
of luck
inviting
with your show as and when it happens. Well, there you are, folks. Thanks for joining us. Next week, we've got Kenny McCaskill. We'll be talking about Grangemouth and other stuff. Thank you for watching us. Stay safe. Take care of each other. Good night.
Good night.